Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2, a podcast by Blockspace Media. Bitcoin Season 2 showcases new ideas and new conversations, sometimes old voices talking about new ideas on Bitcoin. It's the technical and the cultural smashed together. You don't know what type of episode you're going to get. Sometimes we might go deep down the technical rabbit hole. Sometimes we might pull back like we do today and talk about broad strokes about Bitcoin culture. Bitcoin Season 2 is produced by Blockspace Media. Make sure to hit our website, blockspace.media, and check out our other podcasts, The Gwart Show, The Mining Pod. Blockspace is a independent Bitcoin media company focused on the business of Bitcoin block space. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Comes out Mondays and Fridays. We kind of blend mining, ordinals, runes, Bitcoin tech all together in a newsletter that you can digest in about 5 to 10 minutes. So today I've got Dylan LeClair on the show. We're having an open discussion about Bitcoin and Bitcoin culture. We might even open up the box on Bitcoin accelerationism. So I'm going to add Dylan to the stage. What's up, Dylan? Welcome back from El Salvador.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm happy to be here. Excited for this.
You've been traveling a lot. Like, you've been to El Salvador. We spent a cross paths in Hong Kong. I believe you went to Japan as well. Is this kind of like travel schedule normal for you?
Uh-oh.
Are you here? Check 1 2. Can you hear me? Check 1 2.
Charlie, you cut out, man. I don't know if that's my end or yours.
I think it might be your end.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Smooth start. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Are you good?
You cut out right at Hong Kong, but
Oh, well, okay. You've been traveling a lot. You've been to Hong Kong. You're in El Salvador, Japan. Obviously, maybe you're still international. Maybe you're broadcasting from the space station right now because of the delay. I mean, is this travel schedule normal for you?
No, not really. I mean, it's fun to pop all over the world and meet cool people and see new places. But no, I'm more of a homebody, so it's interesting to live out of a suitcase. But yeah, back at home on the East Coast, Hong Kong was fun, interesting. I think it was new for me. I'd never been to Asia, but also new on the sense of the Asian culture around Bitcoin and crypto. There's the ideological crusade of Bitcoin maximalism is a lot. It's not doesn't exist, but it's a lot less prominent, which was new to me. Because I think I've purposely and intentionally kind of been navigating and participating in this echo chamber culturally, and happily so. But over there, I kind of got the feel and just I told explicitly, no, that doesn't really exist here. We're just we're trying to make money. We're trying to make Bitcoin. So it was interesting. I followed up the Hong Kong, the Bitcoin Asia trip, and I went to Tokyo. And that was I had originally actually just planned a brief excursion after the Bitcoin Asia event, but ended up getting a small, a gig over there with Metaplanet. So kind of was less fun and more kind of battering down the hatches and doing some work over there. But we had a meetup, and the meetup was like 10, 15 people. Bitcoin meetup, mempool.space put it together, and they joked. They were like, here are the 15 Bitcoin maximalists in Tokyo. So it was a funny moment, but it was like, okay, I got it. This is more of a Western thing. So interesting.
Yeah, it certainly, I reflect that back. I mean, it certainly felt like a vibe shift. The Bitcoin culture that I knew felt a little bit foreign and out of place in Hong Kong. And it's kind of crazy because if you look at on chain, that's where the majority of the fees and user activity is happening in Asian denominated markets, where they might not know the famous voices in conventional Bitcoin discourse. I guess maybe just to ask a general question. So you're, the colloquially called Japanese Michael Saylor. What does that mean? Do you is your main job coming up with new catchphrases, or what does that actually look like?
Okay, well, the model that Metaplanet is putting together essentially, it came together for the following reasons. So public Japanese company, former big player in the commercial real estate market, still involved, but following COVID, significantly reduced its holdings, sold off a majority of its portfolio, a super majority of its portfolio, to another Japanese public company, cleared off all its debt, and basically spent the last 12 months looking for a pivot. And so the logic is there's no Bitcoin proxies in Japan in the equities markets. There's no ETF, there's no MicroStrategy, there's no Bitcoin miners, there's no Coinbase, there's no Galaxy, there's nothing. And so, the thinking is, we're going to do everything that MicroStrategy has implemented over in Tokyo. And so, it's not like a conglomerate business. But the thinking is, so we open sourced kind of a white paper on the logic, basically the macro environment, the yen, the things I just mentioned, and then also the tax regime in particular is a bit hostile in Japan. Formerly, corporates had to tax unrealized gains in Bitcoin, crypto, or just anything that appreciated in yen terms. Now, if you qualify if you hold your Bitcoin with a qualified custodian and say it's a long-term holding, there's no unrealized tax. But for individuals, the crypto tax is ordinary income, so it's up to 55%. But for listed securities, it's only 20%, around there. And then there's most everybody has a tax advantage brokerage account. So there's the thinking that, this is, while obviously you can't the sovereignty of Bitcoin and cold storage can't be trumped. It never will. But in terms of, if we're looking at this massive, Tokyo is a massive capital market, or Japan, and there's no Bitcoin exposure. So starting out at a small base, it's not, we're not $1 billion company to start. We started at 20 million, but the market's perceived it well. Come at the end of June, we've all, this has all been disclosed. Nothing I'm saying here is private. It's all publicly disclosed. We're going to be increasing authorized shares by 300%. So that opens up equity issuance, that opens up convertible notes, the whole 9 yards. And it's really like where, the macro in Japan is where kind of the US was 4 years ago. Short end yields are 0 or like 10 bips. Long end yields are like 1% and change. And structurally, they have to keep it there because debt to GDP is so high. So we've had a lot of interesting talks, and, the retail in Japan has certainly been interested, I guess, if you will. And it's, the stocks ran up past the value of our Bitcoin holdings pretty meaningfully so far. But it's not a bad thing, and kind of keeps the playbook open for us.
Well, you got me up to the edge of my ability to talk about macro here. What's funny is like the whole when I slapped this title of Bitcoin culture on here, it's like, if Bitcoin culture and Bitcoin discourse really bent heavily macro the past few years, especially post COVID. It seems like everybody and their dog became kind of a macro expert, and some people really are, and some people have gotten really insightful towards it. But I found that's like not my own lane. And maybe to like kind of set the stage here, maybe I'll kind of give some context. I don't know if you remember this, but I believe the first time I met you was at BitBlock Boom in either 2020 or 2021. You were fairly new into like the public Bitcoin space. And that was also a very iconic era. It was kind of like an incubation era for a particular like personality in Bitcoin culture. And then we, crossed paths again in Hong Kong this past month. And I feel that also is kind of, it's almost like a crucible for a new type of Bitcoin culture. I'm not sure what it is. How would you describe this? Do you sense this vibe shift? Where's your head at when I give you the example of these two kind of conferences we were both at? What do you think about this?
Yeah, totally. BitBlock Boom, I think it was August 2020. Remember it quite vividly. Very much it was Dallas, Texas, peak COVID. Everyone was disobeying the mask rules, and there was kind of this like anti-authoritarian, like, FU culture, which is awesome, right? Like I went to a satellite event to start before the conference officially started. And I was new to all this, and I was new to this group of people. And the first satellite event was like 3D printing guns, and I was like, oh wow, like this is it was like, and then on the gun it was inscribed, print guns, not money. And I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. Like, yeah,
It's a
I've
vibe,
never
yeah.
seen, I've never seen anything like this before. And I really, that the message resonates with me, particularly like, the sovereignty of the individual, and, kind of the coming to understand Bitcoin not through first like a cypherpunk lens or a technical lens, but through a macro or money lens of, okay, the system is flawed. This is my way out. And I still think that applies, but ultimately not. Like I've talked to probably a few thousand people. I mean, not only digitally, but like in real life. I was, quite annoying in 2019 and 2020, especially as like the Bitcoin guy. And I've turned that back a bit. I've dialed that down. But now people, from the past or present are like, if they have any questions, Dylan, what is this? How do I think of it? And the kind of the macro lens and the toxic maximalist persona certainly applies to a certain person, and that group is large, but it doesn't apply to everybody, and that's okay, right? That's not everybody wants or is the abolishing the state isn't appealing, right? And for a certain Bitcoiner, that is like the end goal. Hyper Bitcoinization is literally the bankrupting the government, and this collapse and this kind of birth of the sovereign individual, and like I can fully understand that point of view and honestly align with a lot of it, but that the medium for that, and also just the type of person that can really grok that sort of thing, is not everybody. It's far from it, actually. And so I think it's great because it's this intolerant minority of people that, and this is like the classic Bitcoin story, like hodlers set the floor. They're the ones in the bear market buying at 15,000 after 80% drawdown. And Bitcoin's always going to have those people. It's going to that mass, that critical mass of people that are diehard believers in this and will take their Bitcoin to the grave before selling. But right, like I think if you look at Bitcoin's roots, far before I was involved, I was playing with toy blocks in elementary school. Bitcoin was this speculative thing, right? Satoshi dice, and even like a lot of people will commend, and I agree. I think freedom of marketplaces is an amazing tool and should be somewhat the standard. But like the Silk Road, right? People, put this on a pedestal, right? And it's just like buying drugs, right? And so, right, like a lot of this debate the last 12 months has been interesting because on one hand, people will say, well, that JPEG is degenerate and speculative and valueless, while championing the buying drugs with Bitcoin.
And
So
the free
like,
market in
look,
general, yeah.
Or the utmost, and you can buy most things on eBay, right? It's the things that you can't buy on eBay that the Silk Road was useful for. So look, like I'm a champion of both, and not because I endorse either thing or any one thing in particular. I think the ultimate value here is freedom money, right? It's permissionless FU money, right? That's game theoretic. So I'm not going to LARP and say that I saw Casey Rodamore's Ord release and was like, oh, this is a cultural revitalization, or this is this massive thing. Like I faded it entirely, intellectually, financially. Like I have no problem with that, but I think that it's been very interesting just to watch this sort of kind of emergent culture that has basically been siloed in non-Bitcoin. Ethereum, Solana, right? Like this build fast, break things, speculate, right? Like, oh, it's valueless. We know it's valueless. We're still gonna hit the green and red buttons, buy and sell, because that's who we are. And Bitcoin has been like there's been people even in Bitcoin culture that are like, take it personal when you say like, yeah, I'm gonna probably sell a little bit at the top. They're like, you can't do that, that message doesn't resonate with everybody. And I get it. Like I get both sides of it. But the sort of thing that happened post, 2023 has been very fascinating to watch. And I think, with kind of like explosion of speculation and dev activity and funding, and, I think 99% of it washes out, fades to irrelevancy, maybe explodes in spectacular fashion. The exchange rate will, on a lot of these things from its peak, will draw down 95%, right? But like, I think if there's one or two things at the other side of this where we say, okay, wow, that was like, that made all of it worth it. That's exciting, right? And so it fully aligns with my worldview, right? Like a lot of people that were dunking on this stuff were saying in 2021, I remember it pretty vividly, ETH is a test net, all the things of value will come to Bitcoin. And now it's happening and people are having a meltdown. So it doesn't really break my worldview at all. Like, do I agree with everything or do I participate in everything? Of course not. But that's part of being, in Bitcoin. I think that's the beauty of it.
Have you read or are you familiar with Pete Rizzo and I think Nick Carter have talked about the like Bitcoin narratives over the years? Are you familiar with this? There's I think either Nick Carter actually put like a chart where he kind of hand waved and said like, since Bitcoin's genesis, there's like it's almost like a chart with a graph of like Bitcoin is this collectible, it's this speculative asset, it's digital money, it's fast and cheap payments, it's hard money, and kind of traces the dominance of these narratives from year to year. And I think it's really helpful as a mental model to like understand that what Bitcoin has really the users of Bitcoin have understood Bitcoin differently, kind of cycle to cycle, epoch to epoch. And now Pete Rizzo floats this idea of like Bitcoin as a platform. Now I don't know where I stand on this exactly, but this now seems to be front and center. And I mean, I'm going to be talking about it on the show with people who are building on Bitcoin, where it's more of this like platform layer. What do you think of that? Or just what do you think of just the narratives over Bitcoin just over time in general?
Yeah, like, I think in hindsight, so I mean, everything is obvious in hindsight. Hindsight is 2020, but looking at 2022, the mempool was a ghost town. You could send any Bitcoin transaction of any amount, consolidating any amount of UTXOs for basically free. And I was never in the camp. There was a lot of people from the Ethereum camp and crypto broadly that were like the security budget, and this is like Bitcoin, it's existential. You're gonna need tail emissions, blah blah blah. And I was always like, my stance was like, no, there's going to be demand for block space. This is like, if Bitcoin is the most decentralized thing, it is the most valuable thing, it's the most liquid, scarce, blah blah blah. There's going to be demand to settle on Bitcoin. And so the fact that it's come, the mediums or this has been expressed partially through JPEGs or tokens or, in the future, whether it's side chains or roll ups or something BitVM like, that all is kind of fit in my mental model of like a settlement chain, right? Like, okay, this JPEG trading stuff. It's like, okay, well, you have a PSBT swap marketplace, basically, right? Like, who am I to say that you can't do it, right? Because my ultimate, kind of my mental model has always been like, okay, the thing that keeps this censorship resistant, the thing that keeps this thing working is your ability to ultimately, at any point in time, bribe miners in the face of censorship or whatever else to settle your transaction into the next block. So like, I was obviously it's inconvenient if fees spike to, whatever, but I think that there's very, it's very interesting to explore the idea of like what comes out on the other side of this, whether it's a cycle or 10 years from now, from an explosion of just people messing around testing things. And like, I've done the Lightning, like I've set up Lightning nodes, I've used custodial Lightning. It's obviously easier. I think Lightning as an enterprise tool, as someone like Alex Leishman and the River team, they implement a Lightning node. It works fantastic. It's a great product. It's as easy as scanning a QR code. I think it's basically going to look from an enterprise level. It's like, in the future, it could be as easy as Apple Pay, just boom, click, biometric, done. You never think about channel liquidity or everything else, but it is obvious that there is market demand for doing everything with Bitcoin. And I'm someone, I lived in a little bit of a smaller state previously. In the last bull market, I 99, more than actually 99, 100, 110% of my net worth is in Bitcoin. I'm like more bullish. I want to borrow against my Bitcoin. I don't want to sell it. And so, I explored everything. Like I can't, a lot of these businesses that were doing it either had lending platforms where they were hypothecating, or I couldn't use Unchained or whatever it may be. So like I looked at Ethereum and was like, oh, well, they have the ability to borrow against their asset. And is a stablecoin custodial and all this stuff? Yeah, I know that. There are some of these protocols, like, are they truly bulletproof? Like, we'll see. But I think there obviously is demand for that, right? And so I think we're still in this super nascent phase where people are building all these, all this stuff like BRC20s and runes. If anybody's ever traded altcoins, shitcoins, like it's obviously the experience is better on Solana. Like it's just objectively, right? It's like settles instantly. It's cheap. It's like you're trading the stuff. You're trading altcoins on Bitcoin on chain. Sometimes you wait 30 minutes, an hour for for a block to settle, right? So it's like it's not really comparable. But I think you're going to see, and you are seeing like 100 L2s. 99 of them aren't L2s. They're just kind of custodial multi-sigs. But if one of them can do it, or one solution that's, in a trust minimized way enables you to borrow against your Bitcoin with a DLC or a roll up or something that's trust minimized, like we didn't have that a few years ago, right? So I'm kind of excited just to see what comes on the other side of this. I think despite like the institutional adoption of this, the ETF rollout, the kind of the rubber stamp of, okay, Bitcoin, it's not going to die. The state, there's a realization that the state's not going to kill it, but they can still, and they still are, I think, going to mass regulate this, the on-ramps, the, any sort of service provider, the pools, right? They're going to try to really stifle this thing. And so you're seeing that with the privacy stuff, right? Whether it's Tornado Cash on ETH or the Samurai wallets. And then, so I'm just really excited about this sort of like Cambrian explosion of, like shit coins or whatever. Like I think ultimately that's somewhat irrelevant. Like my mom or dad who buy Bitcoin every week has no idea what's going on. They don't care, right? It doesn't really affect them. They make an on-chain transaction like once every month or two. But I think if we're looking at a world where like Bitcoin is, like we're hyper Bitcoinization, right? Like, then I think you want a world where you can do everything you would ever want to do in a way that's both, non-custodial and, and that's just we're not there, right? We can't onboard multiple billions of people, many billions of people in a way that's truly self-custodial, trust minimized. So there's room, right? There's room for all sorts of things. It's going to, Lightning's part of the solution. On-chain is part of the solution. I would love to see covenants. I think the eCash experimentation is fascinating. Fedimint is fascinating. The roll-ups and the sort of like ZK work that's happened somewhat exclusively on Ethereum, starting to be tested out is really exciting. I'm not going to LARP and pretend like I understand the cryptography of it all. But I like I do with many things, I lean on smart people that I know are credentialed and qualified for some of this stuff, right? So I'm excited, right? Like I'm keeping an open mind, and I think it's ineffective at best to just screech and cry and moan about stuff that you can't, like literally can't stop, right? And I've looked into it, like, okay, I don't like JPEGs. Can I stop them? Can I do it? No. Figure out I can't stop them. Then what? Like then why would I ever spend my time yelling and screaming about it? Basically how I think.
It's interesting because you float this. You touch on a couple topics. One, which is like, okay, so there's clearly just a massive amount of like dog shit that's going to be thrown into and around Bitcoin right now. They don't have to even like tiptoe around it. Like there's so many things which is like just they're a glorified multi-sig with a very good marketing budget, and a lot of this will be it'll generate a lot of speculation and dog shit, which I think is fine. And this actually gets into another point you make, which is, but through a lot of this capital deployment and through massive user influx, like certainly we've seen this happen with Bitcoin and other chains in the past. there does result often some material progress forwards. Reindell, in particular, I think on another interview of his, he mentioned that if all the money that ever went to rollups on ETH is eventually all destroyed, well, at least we got something very important out of it, which was significant research and advancement on zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge research. And while it doesn't, we could debate like whether that's justified or not, I think it's really important to note that like this may get into an accelerationist view, which is like, I want more money and more things to be on Bitcoin. I want it to happen today rather than in 10 years. Um, I feel that the camp which wants to move slow and steady is very well represented and strong, which is great. I don't think there are enough people who want to aggressively move Bitcoin forwards. And through this discourse, we can find a productive way forwards for the ecosystem. And so this is where I think of myself, and I've I didn't maximalist never really felt right to me years ago, and so I kind of just threw out this term accelerationist because I was like, I don't know what it is. Been trying to shill Bitcoin to everybody I know for years, and the dominant talking points today don't seem to be effective. How do I communicate this to people? And ordinals are kind of the culmination of a lot of that. But I've been experimenting with framing this network differently for people outside of the hard money anti-state thing. I'm like, I just use different talking points. So maybe we can talk about it. Accelerationism. You talked about it with Peter McCormack. Now I understand like a lot of these kind of talking points and views evolve a lot month to month, and maybe you get better at kind of thinking through it. Maybe that's evolved. How do you put a Twitter post out, I think in January.
Yep.
How would you continue to explain and characterize what you think of as Bitcoin accelerationism?
Yeah, sure. Again, and honestly, I did a pretty bang up job on McCormick. I'm not the most.
Yeah, you really did.
Well, bang up in a bad way, I think. I didn't.
Oh, okay. I was like, look, nobody talked about it since then. I mean, nobody's like had talked about it till then, rather. So,
yeah. Well, look, I see this this effective accelerationist kind of camp, or almost cult, and I don't even say cult in a bad way, derogatory way. This like hyper accelerationist tech group, right? AI, cutting edge, like let's climb the Kardashev scale, and let's get out of here, decels, like stop. No, we need to regulate everything, and like the state needs to approve you to do this, right? Like if I think of the antithesis of what I believe, it's like looking at the EU, right? And like, oh no, here's like 10,000 regulatory agencies. It's like, what a nightmare. And so for me, it's like, yeah, like tech will be a solution to all of this, right? I mean, like I don't think Uncle Ted Kaczynski is I mean, he's a smart guy, but I think that doomer view on technology and right, like just looking at the world, right, looking at the Industrial Revolution, looking at technology and its advancements, it's objectively improved the lives of billions of people, has lifted billions of people out of poverty. Right. So, and I view energy, honestly, like when someone says, and this is very common, I went to a hyper progressive school just for a year. And it's, there's kind of this distance from reality. A lot of these like upper middle class, rich college kids were saying, oh, energy is bad, and fossil fuels are bad. And I would say to them just over lunch or, while I was hanging out with them, like, no, energy is like, energy and our collective aggregate energy production consumption is a derivative of our standard of living, right? Is like our collective standard of living. And so the fact that we're using more and more energy and the fact that technology is advancing more and more is not, I don't think, in that bad. I think it's in that good. And so I saw this kind of emergent culture coming out of and narrative and these builders coming out of San Francisco or like the Silicon Valley area, particularly like, dominant in the AI culture. And it was like, oh my gosh, like Bitcoin is just obviously this missing link, right? One of the things that like deeply orange pilled me was in 2020, I read Jeff Booth's book on it was called The Price of Tomorrow. And it's a Bitcoin book that doesn't mention Bitcoin until like the last page, basically, for me at least, right? And he just goes through. It was just a sweeping book where he goes through and says like he goes through the economics of the world and where we are and the debt burdens and how it like literally can never be paid. And then he goes through information technology and basically says, look, Moore's law is, we're doubling our, semiconductor efficiency. We're doubling tech basically every 2 years. So this is exponential, and us mere mortals can't really think in exponential terms. We're thinking and looking at the world on a day-to-day basis in linear terms, right? So these exponential leaps and bounds don't make sense to us. There was this really good analogy or explanation. I forget exactly the detail. I think it was like if you fold the piece of paper like 30 times, it goes from here to the sun or something. And I might have, messed that up, but it was something like mind-blowing, right? Maybe to the moon, but which is a big difference, I guess. But
it's really fucking far, yeah.
Yeah, like farther than you could ever comprehend, right? And so, that, and then it basically said, so we have these massive debt burdens, we have technology that is giving us more and more for less, right? So, and I saw this because as I was reading this, I was in my freshman year of college, COVID happened, they sent us all home. And so I was on Zoom calls with a boomer professor that couldn't figure out how to use Zoom, that was teaching us curriculum from a 25-year-old textbook, teaching us about like the basic, it was freshman year business, right? So they're teaching us the basics of accounting and a balance sheet, right? And I'm the type of person, if I don't know something, I'm curious, I look it up on the internet. And so I was like, okay, a balance sheet, Investopedia, boom, boom, read it, right? And meanwhile, that was like 2 weeks of lessons or something. So I completely ignored my classes and just started looking everything up and listening to podcasts. And it was like an aha moment that the value of this education is, like, and I wasn't even paying all that much, but the value of this $60,000, $70,000 a year education versus the abundant, basically free information that exists out there had never been more clear. And that was the essence of Jeff's book, right? Is that we have technology that's stripping the cost of everything basically to zero. Not everything, right? There's still physical costs, energy costs, but from an information standpoint, it's all basically free. And there's just kind of these legacy institutions and gatekeepers out there, these walled gardens that will ultimately fail. And so these two forces of this economic system that requires perpetual credit expansion, that requires this, basically inflation of the system forever to keep the wheels greased, to keep this, basically finance Ponzi, the economic system going, versus technology that wants to drive everything, the cost of everything, to zero. And so there's these two forces that like can't actually coexist forever, and it's going to lead to really, really bad outcomes. And so Bitcoin is kind of this, potentially really peaceful solution to this all. And so that was like in 2020, that really orange pilled me. Fast forward to 2022, 23 with this whole AI boom. And I had heard of AI, but hadn't really used it, was blown away by ChatGPT. And just the pace, the breakneck pace of some of this development, whether it's like Midjourney or the now text to video stuff, the deep fakes, I'm like, man, this is going to get really crazy in like not even 6 months, like 5 years. Like what world are we going to live in? And so in that world, right, like in just the amount of GPUs that NVIDIA has printed the last 12 months is unbelievable. In that world, like I don't see how Bitcoin had this absolutely scarce energy money tied to physical energy inputs with a difficulty adjustment doesn't fit, right? And that narrative, I don't think, there wasn't an overlap, right? Like we had this Bitcoiner culture silo, and the tech guys were saying nothing about this thing I was so deeply convicted in. And so it was actually it was the guys at Thea talking with Smeet, who are kind of, they're from that Silicon Valley circle. And they were like, look, Bitcoin accelerationism. And so I was like, okay, this makes a ton of sense to me. And I think, while the Bitcoin maximalist, like, I still have the laser eyes in my profile picture or whatever.
I love my laser eyes. I used to have them. I took them off because they were distracting. I couldn't see well.
Yeah. But like, I still live in that world a bit, but I think increasingly I've become aware and cognizant that when I enter someone else's world, I need to talk their language, right? In the same way that, I go talk to a bond investor, right? And I talk in bond math, right? I talk finance, I talk econ. You go to someone, you're talking to someone in, AI or accelerationism, and Bitcoin fits in that worldview. It's 110% compatible in that worldview. Just I think increasingly, I think they're starting to make the leap, but there's still a gap there. So part of my thought was with the tweet, with the rambling on Peter's podcast was, maybe I can help bridge this gap a bit. So I'm not the best at articulating it. I just kind of rambled there to you for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but I think that's still something to explore.
One of the best things for me to ever get better at explaining Bitcoin was to actually start a business in Bitcoin, to have to do deals where my counterparty is not a Bitcoin believer. In fact, my counterparty is often deeply skeptical and does not want to talk about it at all. So going into mining, I have a lot of conventional industry counterparties that I've had to like build and get to sign contracts. So just kind of like necessity is the mother of invention. So I invented
Yep.
ways of describing how Bitcoin works to people. Yes, it may be reductionist in some capacity, but also like the purpose is to get them through the door and moving in a direction. And another thought is when you describe, I would probably suggest, you talk about energy and this accelerationist, just the fact that all these resources are going to be deployed into Bitcoin, and it makes me think of a criminally under-referenced piece by Cathedra from Drew and I think AJ on Malthusian and Promethean outlooks on the future, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
Where Malthusian is this scarcity mindset, where Promethean is this, I don't know if I would describe it as abundance, but rather not scarcity in the future.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're great. I like the guys at Cathedra a lot. But yeah, no, I totally agree. And like, I think a lot of the culturally, not outside of Bitcoin, like the broader societal culture, particularly people my age, there's this Malthusian mind virus, right? Like a lot of the climate change, and it's like just stop oil, right? And it's like all this stuff where like human flourishing is bad, energy consumption is bad, and I view Bitcoin as this kind of like course correction, right? It's just this engineering marvel that nobody can stop, that nobody can put back in the box, and ultimately, like, and this is where I kind of resolved a lot of the ordinal stuff, the BRC20 stuff, right? It was like, oh, spammers are clogging the mempool, and I'm thinking like every volatile variable spike, right? Where of whatever, even if you think it's garbage, which again, most of it is, right? This is leading to like the physical deployment and build out of physical hardware that's going to be plugged into the grid, into the global energy resources, and start hashing, right? Like every spike in fees is a direct economic incentive to deploy more physical hardware and get more hashes in the Bitcoin network, have this more secure, have this, this Kardashev chase at a small scale, right? It's still Bitcoin's, just a little part of the global energy network. But, that's how I view it, right? Is just like, it's all just kind of this accelerationist view, not only like the build out of physical infrastructure and the energy story, but also, right, like what's the incentive to build scaling solutions when mempool's clearing at 0 sats per vbyte, right? There is none. And so like that's where I was like, yeah, okay, well, if not now, then when, right? And I understand the variability and volatility of the mempool is tough for operators and businesses and whatever. But if it's this robust thing, if it is nuclear grade money in a nuclear grade system, then it should be able to withstand a bunch of spammers or traders or shitcoiners, right? Because ultimately, like our thesis is that a government can't stop this, right? Like 3-letter agencies can't stop this, and that's how powerful it is. So that's kind of where even if I'm like my like culturally my in group wouldn't align with this stuff, I can still reconcile the fact that a lot of it is ultimately bullish, right? Because we're building out all of these scaling solutions. We're building out more robust systems, and we're making sure that we're like ready for these shocks, right? And that's something where that's what you want to see if you have a truly decentralized network that can withstand a government attack, right? This is like rookie stuff.
Yeah, and what we saw is during these like transaction and activity spikes, we actually saw that a lot of existing Bitcoin infrastructure, from pools producing invalid blocks to major exchanges having incredibly unsophisticated UTXO consolidation to wallet design and architecture is like woefully not prepared for a high fee environment. If you look at the landscape of like Bitcoin users, I would say the daily DCA or the like, the everyman of Bitcoin, right? Like the many of these people are not prepared for a high fee environment, and we're 15 years into this thing. Do we want this to be $100 trillion network? Well, then we better have $100 trillion worth of development capacity and like developer attention to building things in this ecosystem. Because like I won't name names, but like I've been trying to use some wallets in unconventional ways, and I'm like amazed. I was like, I thought this shit was like had been people have been working on this for like a decade. Like this breaks under some like very simple, edge case scenarios. So like I and what we're also seeing is that this influx of new users who are they come from a non-technical background, but they end up becoming technical. But
Yep.
through that process, the products that are built to interface with these users have to solve really complex UX and UI challenges, which I
Yep.
don't think there's like I champion like the Bitcoin design community and people who've been doing this for a long time, but we just haven't had the combination of user demand and like the monetary incentive at scale to really drive forward a lot of what I think are some of its design challenges. Some can be improved to the protocol level, and I don't know which are which sometimes. Um,
Yep. No,
so I look at
100%.
that. Yeah, I look at that. I'm like, okay, if a bunch of shitcoins come in and it dominates chain space for a couple years, and we get a dramatically improved, much more retail focused and retail friendly landscape for products and services, like maybe that's the next leg up we need in order to onboard the next billion people. Because I just don't believe that people really want to DCA every 1 week. For some reason, that's just not a carrot for people. We propose this future where Bitcoin is this like lifeline, and in such a case, it can go from being something off in the corner to being the absolute front and center of all of discourse overnight. And we need to build as if like that is a present reality that could happen any day now. So I look at that, I'm like, do shitcoins get us there? I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen then? So miners get paid more. So yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but I one other kind of just general question I want to throw back at you, and this is going to be a curveball, and you might be kind of off kilter here, but are you familiar with the origination of the term accelerationism at all?
Was it was it like no, I inform me. I think I might be
Okay,
in,
so
I don't
well,
want
it's
to throw out
interesting.
the wrong guess.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because that's kind of where I got it. It came from a book in like 2010 or so, which coined the term. But that book references, weirdly enough, French leftist metaphysics and I would basically anti-capitalist philosophers from the 40s and 50s. And what's interesting is that these thinkers, Deleuze and Guattari, they propose some interesting metaphysics ideas, which I think map really interestingly onto Bitcoin. They describe this like almost like decentralized corpus, which has different components to it, which um, like act independently, but all are unified in some capacity. And I look at a lot of these kind of fringe ideas over the years, which have kind of intertwined um, into kind of this more modern metaphysics and more modern philosophy landscape we find ourselves in. I'm like, wow, it seems that people have been talking about Bitcoin for much longer than Bitcoin's been around, even predating cryptographers. You have Henry Ford positing an energy money. And I look at that and I look at human history and I say, I feel so lucky that it's like you get to live at the dawn of the internet. And previously, we've not been able to, as individuals, participate and actually the financial upside to the internet. You had to live in Silicon Valley and be a developer. Now you can be a normal person anywhere in the world and know that this is a big deal and participate and directly profit to the upside, as well as um, see the landscape of global human commerce, money, and society change. So I look at that, and one of the other kind of components to accelerationism, there's many forms of accelerationism on all sides of the political spectrum, and many of them are very bad and scary. But uh, a common thread is that the transition to this future, and in our case, it's hyper Bitcoinization. The transition to the future is probably not smooth, and it probably involves a lot of pain. I mean, think about like the pain and capital destruction that happens if Bitcoin replaces certain world monies. And so the accelerationists would say it is better that that period and that pain is minimized. So we want to get to that point sooner rather than later. So, I'm just kind of throwing some different dimensions from which to consider this concept of accelerationism. But I do want to wrap this up. I got to put on my soapbox.
Love it.
I got to put on my soapbox. Who are some of your favorite voices in Bitcoin right now? And a lot of people look to you for things to think about. But who do you really like? And they can be some of the pantheon of Bitcoin, but they could also be unknown names. Who are some of the people you really are interested in and think are sharp and insightful?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I would say I live in that sort of like macro world. A lot of my roles are involved with that. So, the Lynn Aldens and Prestons and of the world, of course, and even like the more not even Bitcoin people, but like Luke Groman, I've learned a lot from. But in more Bitcoin, especially applying to this, I've got to say, and kind of to your point on the shit coins and the ordinals and whatnot, I was really actually blown away and had pivoted a lot of my views on some of this from being like a net bad to being, this is very interesting, when I saw with more eagerness and enthusiasm than I had really ever seen in mass, a lot of these shitcoin people literally figure out how to run a Bitcoin node and cold storage, and like in the trenches in the early days before there was even kind of like ordinals exchanges, right? And they're running ord and they're doing all this stuff, and I was like, wow, like these people are pretty hardcore, right? And even like the just the software stack that's been built out on all of this, right? Gambling and speculation with the runes and like these wallets and these kind of like the MetaMask of Bitcoin with like Xverse and all this stuff. Like, even if you think it's all stupid, like these sort of desktop wallets, these UI UX, it's really smooth, right? The authorization, like the whole experience. And so, from an accelerationist standpoint, I think that's all a positive. But to your point on like who do I look at, I think people like Ryan Dell and as ever polarizing, right? Like Eric Anuti, like I follow them not because I agree with everything they say, far from it, but just from the technical standpoint, that's not my world, right? So I keep an open mind to all the tech, right? Like I wasn't looking at opcodes a year ago, but now I'm having to, okay, what's the trade-offs with CTV? What's the trade-offs with opcat? Am I going to be contributing to Bitcoin Core GitHub repo? Like, no, probably not. But so like, I think it's a multi, and I guess I don't really have too many people I think of right away when you say who do you look up to in Bitcoin, but I try to go across the spectrum, right? Macro all the way to the other side of like technical. Even someone like Alex B, who's at Bitcoin Magazine, who's covering all the eCash developments and L2s, right? I think that's fascinating. And so I'm trying, as a guy that came into Bitcoin from like a number go up, orange coin good sort of realm, to trying to look and evaluate this like new sphere of technical development. And so I follow people I even disagree with, right? And so, yeah, like I think it's very exciting. You don't have to agree with everything, but I think, being a guy that is just like not one to instant block someone, or like if you call everyone a scammer that you don't disagree with, even if you think like, look, a lot of this stuff is going to go down in Bitcoin terms, whatever. I think if you want to be at the cutting edge of all of this, of understanding it, right, contributing to the conversation, maybe you don't care about any of that stuff, and that's fine, right? Like I actually really appreciate the people that have a burner Twitter, never say anything, stack, just DCA, sit, right? But for the people that have like kind of been at the heart of the cultural discussion and want to maintain that status, then I think that this explosion of development and speculation, right, is going to throw a lot of curveballs your way. Ordinals was distinctly a curveball that no one saw coming in 22. And so I think there's going to be more of that, right? And where we are in a few years is going to be a result of like this, 1,000 developers that weren't developing on Bitcoin coming, trying stuff out, not working, it working, and so like I think that's an exciting place, right? It really turned on me. It really pivoted my view when I saw people saying that the result of Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV or whatever the developers coming in, instead coming to Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, writing Bitcoin script and paying Bitcoin fees were bad for Bitcoin. And it was just, that's not really, that doesn't fit my worldview, right? I don't think any of that's bad for Bitcoin. I think from an accelerationist standpoint, that's all a net good. So I know we're a little bit over time, but I don't have people directly that I think are like, I don't idolize anybody, but I think there's people across a wide spectrum that I think all contribute in a unique way to the conversation. And, I don't really have one original thing that I champion. I like kind of just borrow ideas from everybody I view and deem as smart. So
you and me both. I like to say like I'm not usually the progenitor of the original thought, but I dial into the people who are, and I try to take that and synthesize it into I try to communicate it better than they do. And so in my own capacity, like I've become more focused on Bitcoin developers. And I think that's a trend I clearly see right now, is we spent the past 4 or 5 years getting really non-technical about Bitcoin. We really had a lot of progress forwards on the what is Bitcoin, how to communicate Bitcoin as hard money, the Bitcoin philosophy, if you will. But at the same time, we almost had an atrophy of the Bitcoin technical discourse.
Yep.
And I see the pendulum swinging back. And
Yep.
and you see it from across the user base. The average degen is quite technical about how Bitcoin works now. Yep. And so I think this is I think accelerationists tend to also be optimists, and I'm optimistic about the future of Bitcoin technical discourse. It seems hairy right now, but I mean, dude, it's been hairier in the past. So
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So anyway, we're coming up on an hour. I'm gonna wrap that up. Dylan, I will see you at the next Bitcoin conference or online.
Nashville?
Yeah, Nashville for sure.
Let's go.
I'll be at I will shill Blockspace is the media partner for Inscribing Amsterdam, so we'll be doing some cool interviews and broadcasting at there. Not Amsterdam, Inscribing Nashville. So we'll see. I'll see you there. I'll see the BTC Mag folks there. Really enjoyed this conversation, Dylan.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a lot of fun. It's interesting kind of exploring and diving into this because I don't do it too often, but
yeah,
I think we're on the money with a lot of it. It's an interesting time. It's an interesting time to navigate, especially, as someone or kind of a culture where I think a lot of us have really strong worldviews, and to have that challenged and tested and poked and prodded, I think is good. It's healthy. So I'm all for it, and I'm all for kind of seeing where it takes us in the next few years.
All right. Thanks a ton, Dylan. I'm going to roll credits, and thank you so much for tuning into season 2, Bitcoin season 2, Blockspace Media. Go check out other podcasts, blockspace.media website. See you next week.